Why women remember certain men for years. The core question. There's something most men never fully understand about attraction, and it's one of the biggest blind spots in relationships. It's this. Some men disappear from a woman's mind very quickly, while other men stay there for years. Not because the relationship was long, not because it was serious, and not because the man did everything right. In fact, sometimes it's the opposite. The men who are remembered the longest are often not the ones who try the hardest. So the real question is, what actually makes a man unforgettable? Because once you understand this, you stop focusing on attention, effort, or approval, and start understanding emotional imprint. An emotional imprint is the real foundation of memory. Not effort, not consistency, not availability, but impact. 1. Why memory is not logical. Most men assume memory works like a record system. If you spend more time with someone, they should remember you more. If you talk more, they should think about you more. If you show more effort, you should leave a deeper impression. But the human brain does not work this way. The brain is not logical in emotional memory. It is selective, and it is biased toward intensity. Not duration, not effort. Intensity. This is why a short moment of emotional shock can stay in someone's mind longer than months of normal interaction. Because the brain does not store time spent. It stores emotional spikes. Moments that break expectation. Moments that create contrast. Moments that feel different from everything else around it. So if your presence creates no emotional spike, no contrast, no disruption in expectation, then the brain has nothing to lock onto. And what the brain does not lock onto, it slowly removes. 2. The role of emotional weight. Now let's go deeper. Every interaction between two people carries emotional weight. So people feel heavy, some feel light, some feel neutral. And neutral is the fastest way to be forgotten. Because neutral emotion does not activate memory storage. Think about it. You don't vividly remember conversations that felt average. You remember moments where something shifted your emotional state. A moment of tension, a moment of curiosity, a moment of uncertainty, a moment of unexpected calm. These emotional shifts create what psychologists call encoding strength. The stronger the emotional encoding, the longer it stays in memory. So when a man interacts with a woman in a way that is emotionally flat, everything blends together. There is no separation between one moment and the next. No emotional markers, no mental anchors. And without anchors, memory drifts away. 3. Why predictability kills memory. One of the strongest forces against memory is predictability. When someone becomes too predictable, the mind stops paying attention actively. Because attention is expensive for the brain. The brain only invests attention when something feels uncertain or meaningful. So when a man is always available, always emotionally open, always reacting the same way, always easy to read, he becomes mentally processed. There is nothing left to analyze. And once the brain finishes processing something, it stores it as complete. And completed things are rarely revisited. But when someone is slightly unpredictable in emotional tone, not in a chaotic way, but in a grounded, controlled way, the mind keeps revisiting them because it tries to understand, what is this pattern? And anything the brain is still trying to categorize remains active in memory longer. 4. Emotional contrast is what creates impact. Now here's something most men miss completely. Memory is not created by constant intensity. It is created by contrast. If everything is high intensity, nothing stands out. If everything is calm, nothing stands out. But when there is contrast between presence and space, between engagement and independence, between attention and focus elsewhere, the brain becomes alert. Because contrast signals importance. It tells the mind, this is not ordinary. And anything labeled not ordinary gets stored differently. This is why certain men stay in memory longer. Not because they were always intense, but because their emotional presence had variation. Not forced variation, natural variation. A calm presence that does not depend on validation. That creates contrast automatically, and contrast creates imprint. 5. Why overavailability erases impact. Another major factor is emotional availability. Many men assume, if I'm always there, I'll be more important. But psychologically, it often works against them, because constant availability removes emotional tension. And without tension, there is no depth of processing. The brain does not deeply store what feels too easy. If something is always accessible, it becomes background noise. And background noise is not memorable. This is why sometimes the men who are always responding, always initiating, always emotionally open, fade from memory quickly. Not because they were bad men, but because they created no emotional resistance. And resistance is what forces the mind to pay attention. Without resistance, there is no imprint. 6. Why distance creates long-term memory. Now let's go deeper into one of the strongest psychological triggers, distance. Distance changes perception, not because absence automatically creates attraction, but because it forces reinterpretation. When someone is always present, their value becomes assumed. But when their presence becomes less available, the brain starts reevaluating. Did I misunderstand this person? Why does this feel different now? Was there more here than I realized? This process is important because reevaluation creates memory reinforcement. Anything the brain reevaluates gets stored more deeply. So distance does not create attraction by itself, but it triggers mental reprocessing. And reprocessing strengthens memory pathways. That is why certain men reappear in thoughts after time apart. Not because of manipulation, but because the brain reopens unresolved emotional files. 7. Why some men feel unreplaceable. Now here is the final layer. The men who are remembered for years are not always the best men in traditional terms. They are the men who felt different, grounded, emotionally stable, not overly reactive, not dependent on approval. They carry a kind of emotional independence. And that independence creates psychological contrast. Because most people are used to emotional patterns that are reactive, needy, or overly expressive. So when someone is calm in situations where others overreact, it creates a strong emotional marker. And the brain stores markers, not behavior, not effort, markers. That is why they feel unreplaceable in memory. Not because they were perfect, but because they felt distinct. And distinct is what the mind cannot easily delete. At the end of the day, the reason some women remember certain men for years is not complicated. It is not about effort. It is not about attention. It is not about doing more. It is about emotional imprint. Because the mind does not preserve what is common. It preserves what stands out. And what stands out is not what you did. It is how you made someone feel in a way they cannot easily replace. And that is what stays, long after everything else fades. Follow for more if you want to understand women better.